Awesome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Attli, my coworker Vishal, and today we're going to talk to you about moving to the cloud. You know, we work in an environment where everything is always changing, right? And us as professionals, we aim to kind of keep up with the technology and understand the technology so we can better serve our clients. But something comes along like the cloud, which really totally reshapes the way we operate our IT shops these days, right? So I saw a number of hands when in the last convo when it was brought up who's moving to the cloud or if infrastructure as a cloud is being used, but who is actually on the cloud right now or plans to be moving on the cloud within their organizations, if I could see a hand. Okay, great. So, you know, Vishal and I have been working in the last year on a number of projects and a number of cloud-related projects, and we see a common sort of a theme. You know, a lot of application teams, different application teams are taking different approaches. Everybody's kind of running around doing their own thing. And, you know, we really start to think about what is the underlying issue and, you know, how can this sort of be prevented and not be such of a mess and be more of a streamlined process. It's harder, it's easier said than done, of course, right? But what we need to understand is if you built that foundation and if you have a good plan and you understand the strategies that you are taking and you can communicate that down to the people who are actually going to be configuring the cloud, it's going to be a lot easier and smoother. And also, you know, there's no one approach fits all, right? Everybody has different business requirements, and IT is always you know, hoping to meet those requirements in a more cost-efficient way, and that's where the cloud comes in, mainly cost efficiency. And you know, what is the objective of IT basically, right? It is to enable the business to meet its goals and objectives, and security comes in and helps you do that in a secure way so you can protect your assets and protect your digital footprint. So before we move on, why do we move to the cloud, right? Why is the cloud such an interesting thing? You guys may know this as the characteristics of the cloud. So on-demand self-service. So you can provision and deprovision resources at any given time as your needs arise. And you can do this without talking to anybody. So usually through a portal that the cloud provider has provided. So those days of where you're waiting to onboard a system are gone, you know, when you're interacting with people, and that takes weeks and months, and then you have to configure it when it comes on, and you have to manage a whole lot of overhead with it. So that's all been taken care of. Broad network access, so your customers should be able to access your applications at any given time from anywhere in the world using many different platforms, whether it's mobile, mobile or your laptops, and using, you know, same internet protocols. So we're not defining new protocols to access this information, but it is this, and we're using existing protocols. Resource pooling, so multi-tenancy, right? You're using a lot of resources maybe during the day, but then you have downtime. So those resources can now be shared with other customers. Rapid elasticity. So I would think this is one of the most attractive features of the cloud. You know, it provides the ability to provision and deprovision systems automatically without any interaction. And you know, so something like a load balancer would be in place. And as the need arises and you need more resources, more VMs or more resources will be provisioned automatically to meet those needs. And when the needs go down, it's all going to scale back down to the desired threshold. And measured service, also one of the good features. Which application is using what resource, right? You pay for what you get, and it can get really granular, and you can go down to which application teams are using the most amount of resources, so you can charge those business units appropriately. So now let's talk about, you know, actually stepping on and moving to the cloud. Before we do that, you know, there's 5 steps that we've sort of defined, but what we want to understand is the strategy that you're going to take to the cloud. And it's very important because without understanding the different approach and different strategies that are there, we might not be setting ourselves for success. So let's go over the 4 common strategies. There's more. Usually people will talk about the 6, but these are the most 4 common ones that you're seeing that companies are actually using. So rehosting, also known as lift and shift. Exactly what it says. So you take the application and its underlying resources as well, so the database and the operating system as is, and you will move them over to the cloud. It's cost effective. It is the fastest way to go about it. But what happens is the application that was actually designed was not designed for the cloud environment. So you're not going to be able to take full advantage of the cloud. And then there will be you will face some limitations there, but a Gartner report in 2018 said that even if you take this approach and don't alter any of your application code, companies are still saving, some are saving up to 30% or cutting down up to 30% on their operational cost. Second one, replatforming. It's a variation of lift and shift where you're keeping the application and its architecture relatively the same, but making minor tweaks to it so you can take advantage of some of the cloud offerings. So instead of using your traditional MySQL server, you're going to move on to a database as a server on the cloud. So that'll be the change there. So the operating system and the database, things like that might change, but the architecture of the application will remain the same. Refactoring. So this is one of the most cost-effective solutions, and it takes the most amount of time, but it takes advantage of all the cloud has to offer. And here you'll be changing the application heavily, and you're going to make sure that you can integrate it into the cloud services appropriately. And the last one, not one of the more popular ones, but definitely one looking for, and moving to a different product. So you might just be scrapping what you have on, and you're going on to a software as a platform. So those are the 4 migration strategies, and once we understand those strategies, and you don't have to pick a strategy right away, but once you understand those strategies while you're moving to the cloud and you're going through those 5 steps that we'll talk about now, it'll help you understand which applications certain strategies might be used towards, because you don't have to take one strategy for your whole organization. You can actually divide that up. So let's talk about my migration steps. So we basically boiled it down into 5 basic steps. The steps are basic, but the underlining what happens in the planning is where sort of the whole organization kind of comes together and everybody understands the objective of the business and how the cloud migration will sort of help. And it's a custom solution for everybody, but at the basic level, you can divide these into these 5 points, and you can use actually any of the strategies mentioned before. So your first phase is to assess, right? You want to know your environment. So identifying your assets, what's critical, what's not, or what is more critical than others, understanding the gaps that you actually have. And some of the outcomes you're going to have from this is you're going to actually understand all your assets. You're going to be able to classify your application. And that'll help you prioritize what you need to move during the shift. And then you'll move on to preparing, right? Preparing is where you actually build your project plan. And in your project plan, it is important to assess your applications, prioritize them, and have a strategy for each of the applications. You might pick one strategy for all, or you might have different strategies for different applications based on the goals and objectives of the business. In here, you're also provisioning your cloud-based non-prod environments as well, and also making a solid project plan from end to end of how you're going to migrate up until the end of the optimization phase. So moving on, and also you're actually going to establish some form of a governance model at that point as well, because you want to have oversight over the move, and that starts at the migration phase. So in this page, you're going to actually execute the project plan that you had previously built, and this is where, based on the strategy that you have picked, you're going to start altering the application or its underlining components such as the database and operating systems. And you're going to have all this stuff documented. You're going to start building standard tooling, standard processes, and any additional services and stuff that you need. You're going to actually have all that configured out and have a good non-prod environment set up. And you're going to take those applications and you're going to put them on the non-prod environment, do all the good stuff, do all your testing, and figure out all the problems that you may have before you start to deploy. And then the deploy phase is where you're actually taking the application from a non-prod environment, making it go to a prod environment. And it is important over here that you rehearse in the migration phase the cutover. And the cutover should be an exercise that should be performed to make sure that the transition, when you deploy it onto the prod environment, is seamless. And then the last phase, run and optimize. Once everything is on the prod environment, your job is not really done there. You want to make sure you monitor your applications to see and optimize them and adjust your cloud environment to meet those needs. Now I'll have Vishal come up and explain some of the security aspects and how all that boils up into the 5 steps.
Okay, so as Harry mentioned, there are kind of mainly 5 steps, right? And what basically, where does security fit in this whole migration? Do you guys have any idea? Where does it fit? Beginning? Yeah. Okay. That's the right answer. So security should be everywhere. It should be starting from the strategy, deciding your strategy, from like assessing, prepare, migrate, deploy, and up until you're running the cloud and in your daily activities of migration. So on those 6 steps, we are outlining, okay, what are some of the key activities, or how security can fit into this whole migration process, right? So starting at the strategy, first of all, involving right stakeholders. So when we say right stakeholders, that means not only security team, but your privacy team, your legal team, your vendor management team. And why? Because there may be some requirements which will be enforced when you move your data out from your perimeter and to move to the cloud, right? So that's why it's important to involve right stakeholders. The second one is, as Harry mentioned, the governance program, right? And in the strategy, first you have the cloud governance committee, and which will oversight your migration. And the third one is basically formalizing the program, is basically having a cloud security policy, just like you have information security policy and relevant documentation for operational tasks. And moving on to the next one is assessing. Now, when you move to the cloud, lots of people think that Azure, AWS, GCP, they all are secure, right? But you have to do your own due diligence. As an example, do a SOC review, review their SOC compliance reports, right? And you have to carefully look at the scope, which services are covered in their SOC reviews, right? For example, if they have ISO certification, which services are covered in ISO certification? So after that, you have to identify, okay, what services you are going to use for your migration, and then because this will be helpful in the later phases where you can kind of limit exposure to those services, and you can basically prevent people from your company from using different other services, which can pose a security threat as well, right? And after that, the important one is assessing the skills of your teams, right? As I think we saw in the CISO panel, that talent security, and specifically in the cloud security, that is really kind of it's missing right now. There's a lack of expertise in cloud security. So assessing the skills and providing them the trainings, security trainings. Moving on to the next one, that's where the prepare phase. That is basically where you prepare or define the cloud architecture. And we have those concepts like zero trust environment, zero trust architecture. So you can boil it down, you can bake that into your cloud security architecture. And your security requirements, such as IAM, network security, data protection, you identify those requirements in this phase, right? Because that will be helpful in the next phase, where you will be basically migrating and basically putting those requirements in what is known as infrastructure as a code, or codifying your security requirements. And that's the next point, is basically adopting infrastructure as a code strategy. And when you migrate, right, the infrastructure as a code is basically defines your future state of your cloud. So you can have your code in a GitHub or any repositories, and from there you can have automated deployment pipeline, which will deploy or provision resources in cloud. So in migrating, you can adopt that approach and then have security controls in the automated pipelines, such as scanning for credentials, right? Scanning for API credentials in GitHub repositories, performing testing before you go to the non-prod environment. And as you are moving to the non-prod environment, what is the non-prod environment in cloud? It's a separate account, right? The non-prod environment is basically where you do not have production data. And it is important to first identify when you are moving, okay, what technologies or what approach you will apply for data masking, as in data masking, and you have proper guidance on what data to be masked, right? Because if you miss, let's say, some data, and that will end up in the non-prod environment, it won't be a non-prod environment anymore. After that, deploying to the production. Now, continuing the automated deployment to the production. First, hardening the environment. Because in cloud, you're only few clicks away from a major security incident, and we have seen that in past. So it is important to know or to restrict who has access to your cloud environment. And that's the number 2 point, right? And the third one is enforcing formal change management, incident response, and disaster recovery. So change management becomes really important when you do the infrastructure as a code approach, because then all your changes are being tracked and you have traceability for all changes. And then the last one is where basically you monitor your migration and where you monitor your SLAs. So SLAs with not only cloud service provider, but if you have third parties who are assisting you in the migration, then monitoring that SLA and taking actions based on that SLAs. And so the next one, like if we combine all these things, then there are six pillars of, we can say, the 6 pillars of cloud security, starting from the governance, then data protection, identity and access management, security monitoring and incident management, network security, and secure configuration. So governance, as we spoke, I'll quickly go over those. Defining cloud security strategies, then managing your third party. It is really important to have oversight on your third parties. Then security metrics and SLA monitoring, and as we spoke earlier about the training. Data protection, as Harry spoke about, like identifying your assets and then deciding or what level of protection each asset requires, and then boiling those protection into your code. So the identity and access management, as we spoke, basically managing the identity lifecycle of a user in a cloud environment. And security monitoring, it becomes really important in cloud to monitor your environment, because you may not have like clear visibility in your cloud environment. And we'll see that in next slide. That's one of the key challenge in cloud as well. So secure monitoring is important. And incident management, lots of companies we have seen in past, they do not have cloud specific incident response plans, right? For example, what will be your incident response plan if there's an S3 bucket that is being made public, right? What will be your incident response plan if there's a WAF that allows a WAF misconfiguration that allows someone to access your sensitive data? So those cloud-specific incident response plans are missing. Then going to the next one, network security. What we have seen and in the past is the outbound restriction on cloud resources, specifically on VMs. So those are kind of missing. When I say missing is, by default, with the cloud service provider, as an example, AWS, the EC2 instance, the outbound rule is to allow traffic from the machine to the internet, right? So just imagine if your machine is compromised, right? And then the machine is talking to the internet. Now, this is a default configuration, and lots of people, lots of companies, they are not kind of paying attention to this default configuration. So that is why it is important, especially in cloud environment where you don't have kind of, you are extending your perimeter to provide the network, proper network security controls. And the last one is secure configuration, where basically where you do the configuration through your change management, and you have a standardized process for your builds. Key challenges, I think for the sake of time, I will quickly kind of go over it. Data residency, data ownership, vendor lock-in, deletion. Okay, yeah, deletion. Like, how do you delete data in cloud? The couple of approaches. One, through contractual agreements. Second, defensible destruction is basically encrypting your data and then throwing out your key, or securely deleting your key. Then another challenge is about governance, not having clear roles and responsibility metrics, right? Not having a senior management's commitment. The shared resources vulnerabilities. Cloud being a multi-tenant environment, you are vulnerable to attacks from your neighbors, noisy neighbors as well. So, and then the lack of visibility, not knowing what is in your environment. And the last one is third-party management. So, automation. I have just given like 5 examples. It's not a complete list, but something to start with, like codifying the cloud, right? putting your state of the cloud in code and then doing the deployment through pipeline. The next one is security assessment, automated security assessment. That is basically first you deploy the hardened images, basically known as like your golden images, and then you do periodic assessments to verify your cloud resources are securely hardened enough. The next one, continuous compliance monitoring. There are services provided by the cloud service providers. As an example, AWS Config, which will scan your environment for compliance with let's say, like your internal policies or your best practices. The last one is incident response automation. That is basically orchestrating your remediation in like pre-configured steps. So if an incident happens, then you have a response plan that is basically that is triggered as soon as the incident is happening. So that's it.
All right, I think we have time for one question. One question. Oh, there we got a hand. Great.
Sorry, this is a Bharat Panchal. Migration is like we cannot migrate all things to the cloud. So how you determine that a particular application is the right candidate to move to the cloud?
Sorry, how do you determine?
How do you determine, or what factor you consider that this is the right application I select to move to the cloud?
Yeah, so that basically, first of all, I think he mentioned that knowing what assets you have and like a business importance of each asset, right? Like the 5 characteristics of those assets. I'm sorry, yeah. The 5 characteristics of cloud, that will basically help you to decide, okay, for which application or which asset you want to decrease the cloud, right? For which application you want it to be available, and like it will be like you have heavy traffic for a certain period of time, then you want, okay, this application to be on the cloud so that you can use you can have advantage of rapid elasticity. So I think those are the 5 kind of points that you can, apart from your business impact, that you can use to decide, okay, what asset can go to your cloud.
And just to quickly add, I think you may have some legacy applications or something like that that may not be compatible with the cloud at the moment, right? So when you look and you define your strategies, that's a legacy application is not something you can lift and shift, right? So for that one, you would have to do something like refactoring. And refactoring, it's again, it's a lot of work. So it comes down to the business. Do you really want to rebuild this application on the cloud, or is it okay to keep this application running on-prem in the current environment at the moment? So it just basically comes down to what the business is trying to do, and if it's not possible, you can move it. You just got to build it again, right? And if the business is willing to do that, then yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you again, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.